Welcome to ExtremeLives. Tonight I'm joined by Dete Aliah. Dete works for the Institute for International Peacebuilding here in Jakarta. She works with women who have been deported on their way to Syria to join extremist groups. Dete, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you also.
Dete, can you tell me a little bit about the people who have been deported? I know women and children are amongst the groups.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about where these people, Indonesians, where they've come from? What made them go to Syria to join these groups?
Okay. So actually, there are many women from all over Indonesia traveling to Syria because they have the intention to join some of them are having intention to join the radicals group there, but some of them are actually their intention is only to travel to Syria because they believe that Syria is the blessed country, as Prophet Muhammad saying. So there are, they come from mostly from Java Island. From Central Java, East Java, and West Java. And out of 161 people who are deported, 49 of them are women and 40 are children.
And so you've had the opportunity to talk to some of these women who've come back.
Yeah.
They're brought back to Jakarta.
Right.
They go through a process that you can tell us about in a minute. And then you get the opportunity to talk to them. Can you tell me a little bit about the process, what happens when they return to Indonesia and when they sign up at your institute and how you start dealing with these issues that these women have come back from wanting to join extremist networks? How does the Indonesian government want to deal with them?
Yeah. So when actually it is because of Turkey has applying new policy. Then they deported those people who are actually violate the immigrations. Yeah, so they sent to the camp in Turkey. They sent to the camp in Turkey for 1 month. It depends. There are 2 days, 1 month.
So after they've been picked up by the police?
By the police in the border usually.
Okay.
It's not only in the border. Sometimes it's also in Istanbul.
Right.
So not always in the border. So they sent back to the camp. They were sent to the camp, and then they contacted the governments, Indonesian government, and then they do the process for deporting them, and they sent to Indonesia. So in Indonesia, they were received by Densus 88, and then from Densus they interrogated them first whether they
Densus being the special forces.
Yeah, the special forces. Yeah. And then they were interrogated by the Densus whether they are affiliated to the radicals group. So if they are affiliated to the radicals group, then they will be sent to the Makobrimob. But if they don't,
the prisons.
The prisons, the detention, the prisons. And if they are not affiliated to the radical group, so they sent to the Ministry of Social Affairs shelters in Bambu Apus.
And that's when you get involved, is that right?
Yeah.
And so what happens when particularly the women are sent to you? Do you sit down with them one-on-one? How do you start this process of talking to them about what drove them to try to go to Syria?
Yeah, so when the Ministry of Social Affairs inform us that there are women who are rehabilitated in that center, so we come to the centers and then we meet the women because I want to know what is actually their motivations to travel to Syria. So based on my interview with them, there are actually different motives. So there are women who travel to Syria because they want to join the radicals groups, because they want. There are women who want to do humanitarian work. There are women who want to to travel because of they believe that Syria is the blessed country. They believe that with the Prophet Muhammad's hadith. But there are women also, it is very interesting because the motive is not always about ideology. It's also about social, economic, and political reasons. Yeah? So there are women that I interviewed, they said that they travel to Syria because of, they think Indonesia is no longer the safe country for children to grow. So because during those days, there are many, issues on pedophilia, and also mutilations on the children, rape.
So why do they think taking children to a conflict zone is going to be safer for them?
This is what I also asked them. Why? Because this is also conflict country. So it is not safe actually. So by they believe that this is a blessed country.
So who has told them that this country is going to be safe for their children, is going to provide the kind of social services that they're looking after? Is this part of a pattern of recruitment that you're finding again and again, these promises being made?
Yeah. Actually, they learn from social media. Mostly they learn from social media, but they also learn from offline media. Offline media, I mean, it's like a study circle, Islamic study circle, because some of them are actually learning Islam on the Islamic study circle, yeah. So they learn, but mostly from social media. So they got information from social media that this is a blessed country, very safe, very cheap, and this is will be a how to say a peaceful country. The welfare will be guaranteed, like that. So they believe on that.
So they want to leave Indonesia, which is a predominantly Muslim country,
Right.
because they don't find that it's Islamic enough in Indonesia. Is that what they're telling you?
Yeah. They consider that Indonesia is actually, although we are majority Muslim country, but we are not really Muslim country, Islamic country, because we didn't apply the Sharia law. Because what they expected that Indonesia should be, the law should be based on Islamic Sharia.
From the Quran.
From the Quran, yeah. So they consider Indonesia is actually not yet Islamic country. Therefore, they want to travel to hijrah from, we call it Darul Kufur. You know, Darul Kufur is an infidel land, to the how to say Darul Kufur to Islamic.
So we'll break this down. They're looking for a more pure Islamic way
Yeah.
of living,
Yeah.
and they're being sold the Islamic State, the Caliphate is that place.
Yeah.
And so the messaging that's getting through to them. So we're talking about a variety of women, as you mentioned. We're talking about women who have children, single women, professional women, women who are low skilled as well. How is the message getting through to such a diverse group of women? How is the messaging working to be able to attract such a wide variety of women to want to join the
So
Islamic
this is
State?
the power of social media, because even the message also go to the villages. So I'm also wonder how come the people, the women from the village, they can also get that message, yeah? Because I visited the women, I said, how do you learn? How do you get recruited? And they actually learn from social media.
So when you say social media, are they, you've been in the village? Have you seen the kind of messaging? I mean, have you seen it? Have they shown you the messaging that they've got?
Yeah, they told me, they said, why don't you read the hadith, the Doomsday hadith? I said, where I can get that hadith? So this is actually, and they downloaded.
This is the Quranic verses, yes?
This is not the Quran. This is the Prophet saying.
The Prophet
hadith
saying.
Is the Prophet saying. Yeah. So they even downloaded to my handphone. So they said, this is the hadith, and you can learn from that. So she downloaded to my mobile phone.
And where had she got this from?
She got it from her network. And she also got it from her network, from social media, because they are communicated actually with these groups. Yeah.
In what language does she give this to you in?
The language is in Indonesia.
So this has been
translated
by somebody, translated correctly or incorrectly?
The hadith is actually in Arab, right? But they translate it into Bahasa Indonesia.
Okay, and so this is going around on what networks? The Telegram networks?
The Telegram network, and then also the offline network. It's not through, WhatsApp network also.
Okay, so if somebody was sitting in their village in central Java, where you said a lot of these women had come from, how would they get involved with this messaging? In what way would they get engaged with this messaging?
Yeah, actually, when I asked them how, why, yeah, and they're actually, most of them are actually, they are in the, unstable emotional, actually, mostly, yeah. They are questioning themselves how Muslim they are, how good Muslim they are. And most of them are actually, they want to be a good Muslim. So they learn how to be the good Muslim from social media. They Google, they searching in Google, and then finally they found this site, which is actually managed by the radicalist groups. So they started reading that, and then they expressing their interest, yeah, and then they are invited, for example, through Facebook, like Amak, yeah, they study Islam through this Facebook, and then the moderator will invite them to go to the more private chat, sometimes through Telegram. And in the Telegrams, they also have a group also in Telegrams, and if they're expressing very serious interest, then they will go. They will try the admins will invite them to more private one. So
it's a funneling down process
Yeah.
where they start off perhaps at a website
and then
to a
go
Facebook
more.
page to a Telegram chat and then through and through and through.
Yeah.
So these are women who are searching themselves, but you've also told me about examples where women are specifically targeted
Yeah.
on Facebook, for example. Can you tell me a little bit more about how that works?
Yeah. So when I asked one of deportees how they become engaged with these groups, yeah, so they said that actually she didn't know with the recruiters. So somebody invite her to his Facebook. So they just approve, and then after that the recruiters, who is man, yeah, and then he trying to make a kind like intimate relationships to her, right? She offered like a kind like more intimate, like a boyfriend's girlfriend's relationships. Yeah.
So at first she is on Facebook and this recruiter will see that she's perhaps a single woman, perhaps living abroad, or
yes, she's migrant worker in Singapore.
Oh, this is a migrant worker from Singapore. So she's been targeted. Why would the recruiter think that such a woman would be a good target?
The migrant worker, you mean? Yeah, there are there are some reasons why they recruited the migrant workers. Firstly, because migrant worker has money, so they don't have to they ask money from the migrant workers. So migrant workers is also financing their acts. Yeah. So firstly, because they have money. Secondly, because they can speak English. And thirdly, because they have experience to travel. So it's easy, for example, to guide them to travel to Syria rather than to the women who never travel at all.
Perhaps they also feel slightly isolated being outside their country, away from their friend and family networks.
Yeah, correct.
And so this recruitment of migrant workers, although still very small as far as we know, is quite an interesting turn of events, really, isn't it? The way that these women have been identified. How widespread is it? Do you know, the recruitment of migrant workers?
Yeah, actually, the identified, we only find so far only 9 women. Yeah, but actually, maybe there are many more because I get the report from migrant workers. Migrant workers is an NGO who working with the migrant workers, and he reported to me that there are some of their migrant workers are actually already exposed by radical thought. So he asked me where to report about this issue. So actually, this is the identified is in the Hong Kong one, the one in Hong Kong, right? But there are in Singapore, in Taiwan, who also in South Korea even. Yeah? So there are many actually pocket of migrant worker which is very vulnerable to be recruited.
And Indonesian migrant workers, domestic workers, are all over the wealthier countries in Southeast Asia, East Asia, the Middle East. It's a very huge network of women, really, to tap into, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or who all have the similar vulnerabilities in terms of money and ability to travel. So how much research has been done on this so far?
So on migrant workers or
on the migrant worker recruitment? On the migrant worker recruitment.
There is one research already done by IPEC about the the radicalized migrant workers on the IPEC, and YPP will also follow up the research on BMI on migrant workers also.
Has much research been done in various countries, or is it only a very limited amount at the moment?
At the moment, it's still Hong Kong. IPEC already done in Hong Kong, but we YPP, my organization, we will do in Singapore and also Taiwan. But that's why we are actually trying to build collaborations with Bank Mandiri, BRI, because mostly there are banks, Indonesian bank in the country where there are migrant workers. So we try to collaborate with this bank
to trace money flows,
to support our research and to support our programs.
Okay, okay. So you were saying before as well the number of women who have actually tried to join extremist groups, and those who have actually already managed to get there, who have many of whom have come back now, but you have not talked to those women yet. It's increasing, you say.
Yeah, the number of women.
Yeah. Why do you think more, even as on the news and everywhere, everyone can see that this idea of the caliphate, the stream of the caliphate, is crumbling and that it's a war zone? Why would they still be drawn?
So I think they believe that because they were, so-called brainwashed by these radical groups, And even though they cannot travel to Syria because the Syria they are already defeated, right? ISIS in Syria already defeated, but it doesn't mean the jihad is over. So they can also build a new fatwa. Fatwa is a kind like decree, yeah? Like how to say, announcement that the decree that you can also do in Indonesia if the way to Syria is already closed. So jihad is not always there, but you can do it here in or other country. But Philippines is actually the next, yeah. They already have safe haven there.
So now we're talking about the fact that although some of the women who traveled to Syria or those who were intercepted and deported back, they had various aims, whether it to be a teacher for the Islamic State but now you're talking more about violent jihad, aren't you, when you say a new fatwa that whatever you wanted to do in Syria, you can do in Indonesia. We're now talking about those women who actually want to carry out violent jihad. And so that is now a threat in Indonesia?
Yeah, actually one of the deportees that we found, that we are assisted before, we sent her back home. But then after some days, after some weeks, she left home. And then on 15 August, she was arrested because she is planning to commit a violence act. Yes. So
what was she planning to do?
So what we heard that she has a planning to make a chemical bombs.
Okay, so you're saying that although some women, men, family groups are still trying to get to Syria, that's not going to last forever, is it? Because it's blocked now. They can't get across the border. And those who are there are trying to get out. So where will these people go next? There's a group of people who've been radicalized, women amongst them. What do you think will happen next?
I think they still have the intention to travel because from what I asked them, they still have the intention to travel. But with the latest situations, with the latest development in Syria, I haven't managed to discuss again with them. I mean, I haven't talked to them again, but I think they still have the intention, especially those who are already radicalized, because it is not only about the blessing country, but it is more on the to fight to defend Islam, especially because they consider also in Indonesia, for example, they consider Islam is being oppressed. This is always the narrative they always say to me. Why you do this? Yeah, when I ask them why you do this, why you feel that Indonesia is an infidel, and why you still want to do a kind like violence actions in Indonesia? Yeah, because they said that Islam in Indonesia is being oppressed. I said, what do you mean with oppressed? Because I'm also Muslim and I never feel being oppressed. So what do you mean with oppressed? Yeah, because the program in television is not content of Islamic teaching, Islamic value. So do you think that is oppressed? I said, do you consider that Islam is being oppressed by that? So, and then, they said that because of Muslim is, the program television and the education is not, and the constitution is not based on Islamic Sharia. It is man-made law, which is not good law. Because men is always have mistakes, so the constitution also have mistakes. So we have to replace the constitution with Islamic law. So this is actually the things that they still have in their mind.
So this radicalization of women is not new, but their status and their position within extremist organizations has changed over time, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So if we go back to the days when Jemaah Islamiyah was the biggest threat internally, what was the role of women within Jemaah Islamiyah, the Al-Qaeda affiliated group that was responsible for the Bali bombing, the Marriott bombing, etc.?
Yeah. So actually, this is very interesting for me to understand, to see the landscape, the changing of landscape of women's roles in during the GI and during the ISIS. Because during GI, the women mostly take role as a supporting system. They become teacher, they become logistic arranger, they become courier. Mostly they're working on this issue.
But also before the Bali bombing, after the Bali bombing, of course, there was a huge roundup of anyone who was affiliated with Jemaah Islamiyah, and a lot of people were imprisoned. But during the very active days of Jemaah Islamiyah, Was there a case that some women didn't even know what the men in their lives were up to?
Yeah. So there are there are many women didn't know who is their husband. So this is the very interesting story, because when I asked the wife of the Jamaah Islamiyah supporter, there are many women actually didn't know who is their husband. I mean, whether they didn't know that the husband is actually affiliated to the radicals groups. They just realized that the man is actually affiliated when the husband is arrested. So when they are arrested, and then the woman has to take over the responsibility of the man, because they are in jail, right? They are in prisons. So the woman has to take the role as the husband, as the breadwinner of the family, and this is very hard for women actually.
Why would the men in Jamaah Islamiyah not want women to be involved with the running of the organization, or perhaps not even tell their wives or their sisters that they were involved with this?
There are three reasons. I asked the men, I asked the men, I said, why don't you tell your wife? Because when you are arrested, your wife has to be responsible. So it is hard for your wife. It is not easy for your wife, right? It's a difficult situation for your wife. So why? There are three reasons. Firstly, because they consider, this is very funny, but it is they are serious. Firstly, because the woman cannot keep secret. So when you tell the women, because they said this is a secret missions. If you tell the women will tell their friends, and then the friends will tell the other friends. So their mission will no longer secret. So that's the first reason, because they don't want their mission is known by others, right? The second reason is because they thought that woman's business, woman's responsibility is only to look after the children and the house. So they are really subordinate, subordinate groups, yeah. So they don't want, let them just their business, their responsibility is only to take care of the kids and the family. That's it. So there's nothing to do with this kind of actions, yeah. And the third one, because they consider that this is for the safety and the security of the woman itself. If the woman knows, according to the terrorism bills, if the wife knows that the husband committing, criminal acts or involved with radicalist groups, then if the woman didn't report, then the woman also has to be in prisons.
And then there's no one to look after the family.
And who will look after the family and the children?
Which is exactly what happened when these men, or many of them, were imprisoned in the aftermath of the Bali bombing, 2002 onwards. So these women then, by de facto, almost had to take on a more active role. They had to not only take on the role within their own families, but the networks of the women gelled, didn't they? They became more concentrated and more motivated in some ways, because they would meet more often.
Yeah.
So how did that work?
Actually, when they visited the husband, because the husband is imprisoned in different prisons, right? So when they visit the prisons, they usually have a shelter. So the wife of this imprisoned man, they actually have a shelter. And when they visited the husband, they stay sometimes in the shelter, because sometimes they come from far away from the prison. Sometimes, for example, like the husband who imprisons in Makobrimob, sometimes they come from, they come from different places, right? So the wife come from Indramayu, from Bekasi, from different places. So they have to have a shelter. So they collaborate, they spend, collect money, and they rent a house. And in that place, they're actually supporting each other. Actually, they become strong, right?
And some of these women would have known each other already through marriage networks. And how did that work to solidify groups like Jamaah Islamiyah with other extremist groups, militant groups in the region? The importance of sort of marriage networks.
Yeah, actually, they have like national merit, right? Yeah? So they married, for example, like the Indonesian woman married to the Filipino, or the
Filipino extremist or fighter,
or fighters. Yeah? The married to the Filipino fighters, or the Filipino women married to Indonesian fighters. So this is actually they building the network, and even they go far. They go far during the GI. They also have to expand their network to Australia. So like somebody from Indonesia married to the Australian, or they move to the Australia, and they also start recruiting their member in Australia.
So building networks through organizing marriages between different groups.
Yeah.
And how important a factor has that become in the days, well, since Jemaah Islamiyah and the networks there moving forward towards more radicalisation and moving towards Syria. Are marriage networks still important there, or have other things taken precedence over it?
Yeah, I think there is the international marriage. Yeah, I think this is also part of their strategy to strengthen their network. Because when ISIS is defeated, okay, ISIS may be lost in Syria, but they still have a network. They still have network in, for example, in Uyghur, they still have network in this. So they have a kind of like a virtual, it's no longer a state, yeah, but they have actually a virtual network, meaning that they are scattered everywhere, but they're actually quite strong.
Connected through extended family networks.
Yeah, right.
Any of the women who had been deported, the ones who were trying to join the Islamic State, had any of them been promised marriage or spoken to by recruiters about the possibility of marrying foreign fighters?
From the number of women I interview, I asked them actually whether you are promised to marry to someone there in Syria. They didn't really want to open, right? They didn't tell me the story. But from the video that BNPT made, the returnees, actually they said that the children, they are actually already proposed many times to marry them. Oh, there is one. Actually, there is one deported. She has a daughter, 14 years old. And then actually somebody approached her and asking whether they can marry the daughter. But then she refused. She said, no, my daughter is still young. So I don't want her to marry in the young age. So actually somebody already come to approach her to ask for the daughter.
So with the changing roles of women in the Islamic State, so what kind of roles were, not just the Islamic State, but other extremist groups, militant groups that they were trying to join in Syria? What kind of roles were they promised, and how does that differ from the kind of roles that women had with an organization like Jemaah Islamiyah?
It's for the women, you mean, yeah? The role for women. In Syria or in Indonesia?
How does the roles that they were promised, or for those who actually made it to the Islamic State, how did their roles differ? And what were they promised that was different? What kind of life was different from what the women at Jemaah Islamiyah in previous days had lived and experienced and expected?
So in Syria, they offer actually like they offer the women to join the humanitarian, right? To help them in the kitchen and also to help them to teach the children, because there are many children actually, Indonesian children in Syria, and they cannot go to school, the international school, because there are language barrier. So they invited the woman, Indonesian woman, to teach there. Yeah, so this is the role as a teacher, but there are also the roles as a jihad, to join the jihad and also to marry with the jihadists. Yeah, so this is also different roles. This is the roles in there, but I also do the research on the ISIS women in Indonesia, and they actually have many roles here. So during the Jemaah Islamiyah, the roles of the women is only for supporting roles. Which is not really this is important, but not really that the top positions of role. But during the ISIS, the roles of women are expanded. Yeah, so there are women who become the campaigner. There are women who take part in financing, even financing the act. Yeah, there are women who become recruiter. There are women who become the campaigner. There are women also who become the educators to keep the spirit of jihad, either to their children or to their network, and also the suicide bomber. There are women also who committed to be a suicide bomber.
So that's obviously a lot more of an active role than in Jemaah Islamiyah, where women were never allowed to be suicide bombers. Not that we should see that as an upgrade in any way, but with the role of finance, with the role of recruiting, I mean, these are crucial roles within any organization.
Yeah.
So are women allowed to operate in the online space in terms of running their own recruitment websites or chat groups?
Yeah.
And they reach out to other women internationally?
So usually also women is also playing as a recruiter. So they are trying to recruit also many women through social media. Yeah, so Like they're recruiting, like there is a Facebook, for example, they're teaching, talking about woman's, how to say, woman in Islam, and then they started actually recruiting the other women, yeah. And they also do not only online, but they also do the offline recruitment.
Both in Indonesia and abroad as well?
They recruited, yeah, for Indonesia, for the action in Indonesia, and also to travel to Syria.
And in terms of how you work with these women, when they come to you, you've spoken about the process of how they leave Turkey and then they have to go through a process in Indonesia before they're assessed and then they end up with your organization. What kind of projects or programs do you run to start this process of de-radicalization, I guess?
Okay. So actually we already established quite a long time, 2008, almost 10 years. But firstly, we are working with the men, not women. Yeah, actually we are focused because how to say, radicalism or violence extremism is very masculine. Yeah, so many the actors are men. So we are working with the men, with the, how to say, violent extremist offenders or so-called terrorists. Yeah? We are familiar, well known by terrorists. So we are working with the men. But then we realized that working with the men is not enough. So we have to also involve the women, because women is actually can be the agent of change. They can also de-radicalize their husband or their member of family. So that's why we started working with the women also. And then actually it is indeed, because out of the 60 women I interviewed, 90% of them, the wife of the GI supporters, actually they don't want the husband to go back.
This is the wives of the imprisoned Jemaah Islamiyah.
Yeah, it's not only imprisoned, even the released one. So there is still imprisoned one, and there are many also already released.
These are the women who can see the price that has been paid in terms of the role that they then have to take on because their husband is in prison. So they don't want their husband involved with this anymore.
Yeah.
And what about the women who have come back that you're dealing with now? And I know that these are the deported, the women who've been deported, so they haven't managed to get to the Islamic State. Are they as easy to convince as the women who you've worked with, who are the wives of prisoners, essentially?
This is the challenge, because working with the wife of the GI supporters or the GI supporter is, for me, is quite easier than dealing with the deportees, because the deportees consider themselves that they are doing the right things. So they believe that what they have been done, traveling to Syria, is not committing a crime. So they consider this is actually they following what the Prophet said. So they consider what they do is right. So when you come to approach them, some of them are easy, but some of them are reluctant. They actually, refuse. They refuse us. They don't want to be visited by us again, because they consider what they do is right. So they didn't commit any mistake.
So how do you approach this situation then?
Yeah, so it's not easy, right? So when, for example, when I came there, and then they very resistant, and then they even told me firmly that they said, we are fine and we don't need you anymore, so you don't have to come again to us. But actually, I come on the wrong time. So actually, I come on the wrong time, because they just have problems. The family has problems, and they are still traumatic because of that problems. So when I came, actually, we came on I come not on the right time. So that's why they're resistant to us. But actually, I met her when she was still in the shelter. I have met her already, and she's very nice actually. But the family is resistant.
And so what is the way forward then? How do you stop people wanting to travel to, these incredibly dangerous places, not just Syria, but as we were talking about, they come back, there's a possibility of further radicalization inside Indonesia or traveling to another area in the region, perhaps the Philippines. How do you stop it?
So that is why I do the research, because I want to know the pattern. I want to know the pathway, why they travel. So from that we know, we know what is actually the reason for them to travel, right? So if it is about ideology, then we can do we can do the counter narrative. So if it is about politics, because not the reason is not always about ideology. There are sometimes also about politics. So, but I think the politics is being used by the radicals group to recruit people.
What do you mean by the politics? What is
So, for example,
motivating
like
them?
this, one of the one of the deportees who become radicalized, more radicalized after they are deported, and now she's being arrested in the prisons. Yeah, because they are actually challenged me with a political issue. When I met her, yeah, she asking me about the justice, whether Indonesia is already a justice country or not. I said, why you ask me these questions? Yeah, because Indonesia is actually an infidel. How to say? Indonesia is an injustice country because they arrested the old woman who taking woods from the jungle, but they didn't arrest the corrupter. Do you think this is justice for people? So,
It sounds like a small issue to radicalize somebody. So it's a part of a bigger issue. It's part of a bigger problem that they consider, again, that until there is sort of Islamic law in Indonesia, that it will never be a just country. Really, is that what they're saying?
yeah. So this is what I think the government, if they want to do a kind of like preventing or countering, it's not only about ideology, because their concern is not only about ideology, right? There is social problem, there is a political problem, economical problem that they become, that motivated them actually to do a violence acts. So actually, it is not only to solve ideological per se, but government also have to look like what is the issue that these people are motivated to do violence acts.
Dete, thank you for joining us. Thank you. Thank you for joining us at ExtremeLives. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with our next interview. Thank you for joining us.